Cheers. A toast to the king.
You elect will drink wine new with Yahweh Shai. You elect. As of right now, we say hopeful elect. You elect of Israel out there will drink wine new with our Lord Yahweh Shai in his Father's kingdom, which is going to be the kingdom of heaven here on this planet Earth once Yahweh Shai returns. When our Lord comes back, one of the first things he's going to do is have a toast with his men. He's going to have a toast with his men, those that stood stiffly for his name and his Father's name. Let's read this one more time. Matthew chapter 26, verse 29. But I say unto you, I will not drink henceforth of this fruit of the vine, which is wine, which is made from grapes, as you know. And our Lord, he loves to drink, man. That's something that our Lord took pleasure in when he was here on this planet Earth. He's not going to do it anymore until he returns to do it with you. Showing just how much he loves his elect, man. He's not even going to drink until he does it again with you. I will not drink henceforth of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. So what a moment that's going to be, man. And you can only imagine the quality of wine that's going to be. Our Lord Yahweh Shai, he has access to different things that we don't even know about, man. Access to different grapes you don't know about. Has access to an entirely different quality of life that we don't know about. But he's going to reveal it to you. He's going to give it to you when he returns. Now, you have what's called a loyal toast. A loyal toast. I'm going to read this real quick. A loyal toast is a salute given to the sovereign monarch or head of state of the country in which a formal gathering is given. In this case, the sovereign monarch or head of state would be Yahweh Shai. He's our sovereign monarch. He controls everything, man. But guess what? He's also going to extend that power to you elect. He's going to share that power with you. A loyal toast is a salute given to the sovereign monarch or head of state of the country in which a formal gathering is given, or by expatriates of that country, whether or not the particular head of state is present. In this case, the Lord will be present. So you're not going to have someone speaking for him giving a toast. He's going to host the toast. He's going to be there, man. We're living in a time we're going to meet Yahweh Shai. You're going to meet him face to face, which is proof also that we have to be changed. We can't meet the Lord like this. He's going to change you. He's going to crown you, and he's going to toast with you. Now let's read some more. It says, it is usually a matter of protocol at state and military occasions and a display of patriotic sentiment at civilian events. The toast is usually initiated and recited by the host, which will be Yahweh Shai, before being repeated by the assembled guests in unison.
To the kingdom. Cheers.
Sometimes when Akim are among each other, we'll do little small toasts. Brothers may be like La Yasharala, holding up cups. But imagine the Lord himself hosting it, man. And we join in. And I was reading something else, and pretty much they said in order to have what they call a loyal toast, you would use wine. That's the beverage of choice. And once again, our Lord, he's coming back, and we're going to see him with all that power, man. But he's going to extend that power to you. Now, reading on a monarch, it says a monarch is a head of state for life or until abdication, in this case for life. And therefore, the head of state of a monarch may exercise the highest authority and power in the state. Or others may wield that power on behalf of the monarch. And that will be you joint heirs. You different men that are going to reign with the Lord, man. Usually a monarch either personally inherits the lawful right to exercise the state's sovereign rights, often referred to as the throne or the crown, or is selected by an established process from a family or cohort eligible to provide the nation's monarch. In this case, the Heavenly Father Yahweh himself selected his son Yahushua. And once again, when our Lord returns, he's going to wield that power to you elect as well. Once again, he's going to change you, he's going to crown you, and he's going to have a toast with you. A kingly toast.
To the kingdom! Cheers! A toast with the king! Raise your glasses, my friends. A toast with the king. A toast with the king. Raise your glasses, everyone. A toast to a prosperous future. To the king. To our glorious future. To the victors, blow the spoils. Raise your glasses. Cheers! Raise your chalices to the golden age of our kingdom! A toast to the king!
All right. Shalom. First and foremost, I would like to give all praise and glory unto Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shah Bahashem Rakakwadash. Double honors unto the apostles and the elders of GMS who rule well, teach well, being great examples towards younger brothers, and peace and blessings and salutations to the hopeful elect out there pushing his word and truth and this sincerity across the four winds in the name of Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shah, pushing to get up out of here. You know, shalom to the hopeful elect, the believers, the listeners who have came back to the obedience of the scriptures through faith in Yahweh Bahashem Shah. All right, so what we want to get into today, all right, morning news and prophecy, you know, and the biggest thing in the headlines, you know, is these talks, all right, between America and Iran, all right, and there's a lot of news circulating, you know, these talks, okay, and basically they're saying these talks have failed, you know, because what, you know, America, all right, is trying to showcase like it's in a position of power, and it's not, okay. Iran has all the leverage, okay. Iran and his allies, China, Russia, okay, has all the leverage in negotiations, okay, and Iran ain't budging, okay. They're not moving on any of their points, okay, that they've presented as the framework of these talks, okay. They're not budging, and America is still trying to, you know, throw weight around, all right, that it doesn't have, okay. So, you know, there's a major disconnect between these talks, and we knew from the beginning, all right, that it was never going to amount to anything, all right, because of America's pride, all right, was going to be, you know, a major hindrance in trying to come to any type of deal, which we know according to prophecy, all right, that this war has to continue on. anyway. And that's the beautiful thing about understanding prophecy. Matter of fact, let's get this. Since I said that, this is let's get this in Isaiah. And now, all right, they're at the point to where eventually they're gonna go back to war. Okay, and I got a few videos just going, into the happenings, dealing with these talks. All right, and I say what it has shown, that America is weak. No matter how tough they try to play on the internet. Okay, in real life, these nations see that America has been weakened. Okay, this Isaiah 33:6, it says, "And wisdom and knowledge shall be the stability of thy times." And the wisdom and knowledge of what? Of prophecy. You see, what most people have to speculate, we have full understanding. We have assurance. That's a beautiful thing about understanding prophecy. I say, well, most people speculate, different experts and, analysts and, okay, veterans and, economists or whoever, okay, things that they speculate in. Well, we have assurance in, and we know that this war is going to continue on. It's going to drag in more nations, and eventually it's going to go nuclear, all right, and usher in the return of Yahweh Shai. You see, we know what these things lead to, okay? So we know, all right, that other prophecy has to happen. So we know it's going to be, this war is going to stay conventional until, all right, you have Jacob's trouble, civil unrest, okay, the collapse, the global reset of the economy, and the MOTB being made mandatory, okay? Those things have to happen before this current war, all right, which is going to drag in other nations, all right? It's going to constantly pull them to the region of Jehoshaphat and to where they're going to be judged, okay, by Yahweh Shai, okay? So it says, "And wisdom and knowledge shall be the stability of thy times and the strength of salvation. The fear of the Lord is his treasure." Okay, so we understand where this thing is going. It's not a speculation. No, it's assurance. Okay, and you go here because everything is happening exactly how the Lord said it would happen in prophecy, man. And this is our assurance. We have a more sure word, okay, of prophecy, okay, in these times. You see, when you go to Joel 3:9 said, "Proclaim ye this among the Gentiles, prepare war, wake up the mighty man, let all the men of war draw near, let them come up." Okay, and what we've been seeing, all right, of late is that these nations have been preparing themselves for war, all right, and much more now in this last month and a half, okay, of fighting between the small hats, America and Iran. All right, these nations in the background are even more preparing themselves for military readiness, man. Okay, and we're going to show you these nations are picking sides, man. All right, and the Lord God is set up to where these nations have to pick a side. Okay, they have to get involved in this war. Okay, it says, "Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say I'm strong." Okay, and what we're seeing is a power shift, from the west to these nations of the east. All right, and we have to understand the elites are on both sides. Okay, and they're on both sides of the war. All right, and what we're watching a power shift. Okay, from these Western governments to these Eastern governments. Okay, and it's all going to end. All right, it's all going to lead into a major war. Okay, right now this is just the beginning. All right, the very beginning of the Third World War. Okay, but it's going to continue to draw in other nations, and these nations that were considered weak at one point, now they're beginning to show strength. Okay, as the Lord is preparing them to do what? Take down the whore. Okay, which is America, man. Before Yahweh Shai takes all of them down. Okay, verse 11: "Assemble yourselves and come, all ye heathen, and gather yourselves together round about thither. Cause our mighty ones to come down, O Lord, Yahweh Bashem Shai. Let the heathen be wakened, all right, and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat, for there will I sit to judge all the heathen round about." All right, so the Lord is using this war to judge the heathen. Okay, America is going to get the worst judgment judgment. It's going to be isolated. It's going to be brought low. We're going to constantly see America be embarrassed on the global stage, being made insignificant, unimportant, small among the heathen, as we went into yesterday, man. Okay, America is becoming insignificant on the global stage. All right, they're getting treated like clowns now. America, was treated with all this privilege, throughout the earth. They began to just do what they want, do as they please. Okay, just treacherous, wickedness, double crossing, triple crossing. Okay, keeping up mess and coups and regime change all over the earth, man. Okay, because they had that privilege, they had that name, that reputation. Okay, that people fear. Okay, but now, all right, as America is underperforming, okay, on the battlefield, all right, their reputation has been diminished. You see, and now America, all right, is becoming insignificant in global, all right, and on the global platform, man. And these nations are beginning to make moves around America, man. It was suicide at one point to make moves and then involve America, man. Okay, but now, all right, the earth, all right, these nations of the earth, these heathens, they're beginning to make moves around America, man. And it's going to lead to a war, and these nations are going to be drawn, all right, into this region. It's going to be, because right now it's a regional war, all right, but it's going to expand into a global war. And these nations are going to be drawn into this region of Jehoshaphat, where Yahweh Shai is going to come and judge all of them, man. So these nations' victory over America are going to be short-lived, because Yahweh Shai is coming to judge everyone, man. Okay? Because when you go into, let's get this word, all right, Jehoshaphat, which is Yahweh Shaphat, all right, which it's a compound word, all right, Yahweh, all right, the Heavenly Father, Shaphat is judgment, okay, in the Hebrew, all right. So let's go to, all right. So when you go into the word Shaphat, okay, Shaphat goes into what? It says to decide controversy, okay, to judge, to vindicate, to punish, okay, and the elect are going to be vindicated. Yahweh Shai is going to be vindicated, okay, and these heathens are going to be punished. It says to execute judgment, okay. Now when you go here, it says at the theophanic, all right, event, okay, advent for the final judgment, all right, at the theophanic advent for the final judgment, man. Okay, and you go into this word theophanic, all right, because this is going to be the final judgment, because the Lord, he's going to do a regime change, and he's going to set up Yahweh Shai, okay, and the first fruits, okay, as the governing body of the world forever. That's going to be the last. That's why scripture say what? The kingdom shall not be left to other people. There's not going to be any more regime change. That's going to be the final judgment of the Most High. His sons and rulership forever. His people being his ruling family forever. Men, women, and children, man. Okay. So let's see. This word theophanic. See what does it mean. Yeah, it says theophanic. All right. So let me pull this up. We'll start getting to some of these videos. All right, so let's get into this word theophanic. So just real quick. All right, it says theophanic. Okay. So theophanic is an adjective describing a visible, audible, or tangible manifestation of a deity to humans, often characterized by overwhelming natural phenomena like fire, clouds, and thunders. It signifies a direct divine intervention. Okay, the Lord, Yahweh Shai, is going to directly intervene in this war. All right, he's going to be revealed, all right, to the earth. Yahweh Shai is going to reveal himself to the earth in this war, man. Okay. You see, and they go off, into Judaism and Christianity. No, this is the truth of the Bible. This is the climax of prophecy. All right, Yahweh Shai intervening, okay, in this war. Okay, that's what this thing is building up to. So let's go from there. Now, I just want to go get this video first, just dealing with the talks, and then we'll go into, the role the elites play in this thing, man. All right, so let's see. Oh yeah, let's go to this clown. All right, and the American government is looked at as clowns everywhere in the earth. If a brother want to get that, let's get that Habakkuk chapter 2 verses 15 and 16, Baba Kasha. Habakkuk chapter 2 verses 15 and 16. If a brother want to get that. All right, so let's play this.
Well, good morning, everybody. And let me say a couple of notes of appreciation. First of all, to the Prime Minister of Pakistan and to Field Marshal Munir, who were both incredible hosts. And whatever shortcomings in the negotiation, it wasn't because of the Pakistanis, who did an amazing job and really tried to help us and the Iranians bridge the gap and get to a deal. We have been at it now for 21 hours, and we've had a number of substantive discussions with the Iranians. That's the good news. The bad news is that we have not reached an agreement. And I think that's bad news for Iran, much more than it's bad news for the United States of America. So we go back to the United States having not come to an agreement. We've made very clear what our red lines are, what things we're willing to accommodate them on, and what things we're not willing to accommodate them on. And we've made that as clear as we possibly could. And they have chosen not to accept our terms. Questions?
Nick Robertson from CNN. Precisely what have they rejected here? Can you help us understand it a little bit?
Well, I won't go into all the details because I don't want to negotiate in public after we've negotiated for 21 hours in private. But the simple fact is that we need to see an affirmative commitment that they will not seek a nuclear weapon, and they will not seek the tools that would enable them to quickly achieve a nuclear weapon. That is the core goal of the President of the United States, and that's what we've tried to achieve through these negotiations. Again, their nuclear program, such as it is, the enrichment facilities that they had before, they've been destroyed. But the simple question is, do we see a fundamental commitment of will for the Iranians not to develop a nuclear weapon, not just now, not just 2 years from now, but for the long term? We haven't seen that yet. We hope that we will. Jen.
Was there a framework on anything? And also, did the Iranian frozen assets come up? And did you reach any conclusions on those frozen assets?
We talked about all those issues, Jen, and we talked about a number of issues beyond that. And so certainly those things came up. But again, we just could not get to a situation where the Iranians were willing to accept our terms. I think that we were quite flexible. We were quite accommodating. The president told us, you need to come here in good faith and make your best effort to get a deal. We did that. And unfortunately, we weren't able to make any headway. Preston.
Mr. Vice President, how often did you communicate with President Trump throughout the negotiations? There were reports that there were multiple rounds, where there were breaks in between negotiations. How often did you communicate with the president throughout those rounds, and what was he saying as you were going through these negotiations that you said fell short?
Yeah, obviously we were talking to the president consistently. I don't know how many times we talked to him, a half dozen times, a dozen times over the past 21 hours. We obviously also talked to Admiral Cooper, to Pete, to Marco, to the entire national security team. We talked to Scott Bessent a number of times. So look, we were constantly in communication with the team because we were negotiating in good faith. And we leave here with a very simple proposal. a method of understanding that is our final and best offer. We'll see if the Iranians accept it. Thank you.
They're not going to accept it. They already rejected it, man. Okay? Because they ain't come. Iran didn't show up to hear American terms. You see, Americans just trying to, posture itself as it's still in the position, okay, of being superior. No, America is operating from an inferior negotiation stance, okay? Because the things that Iran has on those 10 points, well, some of those things they're already enforcing, okay? They have control of the Strait of Hormuz, okay? They don't need America's approval to control the Strait of Hormuz, okay? To charge and people tolls for the Strait of Hormuz. Iran is making money off the war, okay? So they don't need Americans' approval. America can't stop that, okay? So Iran don't need a deal. Iran just can keep going to war and they're winning, okay? And it only gets worse for America, okay? Who's fighting a war 6,000 miles away from his homeland at a major disadvantage, okay? So Iran didn't come here to hear, all right, Americans' demands, okay? They came here to state their demands, and it didn't. And like I said, that's the big disconnect, okay? So these talks are pretty much pointless, all right? And in the meantime, like we were going into yesterday while Iran was talking, all right, China was loading them up, okay? The whole time that they're in these negotiations, China loading them up, man. And there's other players that are rumored to be involved, okay, that are beginning to help Iran, all right, which are American allies, man, okay. So let's go from there. I'm gonna get them precepts as well. Brother can get that too. Isaiah chapter 10, verse 33, Bible Shah. Let me cue up this next video, then we'll get some more precepts, okay. But nah, man, America just trying to posture itself. I say the only thing America can do is just play tough for the internet. That's what it's been. That's what it's come down to. Okay, with America, they can just play tough for the internet, but the world know what it. But these nations know what it is. Okay, so let's cue this one up. He gonna go more into depth and more into depth. Okay, with the talk. So let's go here. Get some of these precepts you brothers got. The why to you brothers, tuning in, helping out the screen. All right, this is the book of Habakkuk chapter 2 and verse 15. It says, woe unto him, this from the brother Hopeful Lake 3, brother Yaquab. All right, it says, woe unto him that giveth his neighbor a drink, that putteth thy bottles to him, and makest him drunken also, that thou mayest look, okay, at their nakedness, man. Okay, so America has done this, okay, mainly to the tribes, to what he's able to, social engineer, Jake to be a degenerate. All right, then he's able to put the camera on, all right, Jake, and show the world, look at these niggas, man. This is why we had to enslave them. This is why we treat them like they are. They're less than human. This is just how they naturally are. Okay, but the scripture say what? Woe, which is destruction. And what? This third world's war is a part of the punishment, okay, of these nations, man. And America gonna get it the worst. Okay, you see, this is also this war. We have to understand the Lord, okay, is punishing these devils for what he did to his people, man. Okay, they got to factor that in as well. So this verse 16, it said, thou art filled with shame for glory. All right, and America's being shamed. All right, America. All right, JD Vance and Trump, they call these niggas the Epstein class, man. Nobody take these niggas serious, man. Okay, that's why I sent that nigga away from them, man. They told that nigga scram. All right, my Iranian officials, that nigga scram. He ain't talking about a goddamn thing. Okay, and it's certain of them, and in certain of U.S. officials that Iran said, look, don't even send them niggas over here, man. If you send them, we not talking, man. It's certain officials they don't even want to talk to, man, because they look at them with disgust. Okay. It said, "There are filled with shame for glory. Drink thou also, and let thy foreskin be uncovered. The cup of the Lord's right hand shall be turned unto thee, and shameful spewing shall be on thy glory," man. And this is where we at with it, man. Shameful spewing is on the devil's glory, man. For the longest he's been able to parade himself, around the earth with all this pomp, with all this pride, and looked at as a hero, the police of, the world, the moral, all right. They looked at America as enforcing, humanity and morals in the earth, and it's been the exact opposite, man. Okay, it's been the biggest terrorist group on the planet Earth is the American government, man. Okay, and the American military is the hitchman, all right, for the biggest terrorist organization on earth, which is the American government. Okay, so the American military just carries out the agenda of the American government, man. Okay, the biggest organized crime syndicate on the planet Earth is the American Edomite government, man. Okay, verse 10, it says, Isaiah 10:33. It's from the Hopeful Elect 3 as well, Brother Yaqua. It says, "Behold, the Lord, all right, the Lord of hosts shall lock the bow with terror, and the high ones of statue shall be hewn down, and the haughty shall be humble," man. Okay, so the Lord has America like it's like a humiliation ritual, man, that the Lord is doing with America, man. Okay, America is looking extremely weak and incompetent, man. Okay, and like I say, the elites on the outside, and they're just manipulating because they don't care about nations. All right, they're not loyal to the French, the UK, America. All right, they want a control system implemented in the earth, man. Okay, and they're riding this war, okay, in hopes to implement a control system at the end of this thing, man. Okay, because a weakened America plays in their benefit as well. Okay, and America overplayed his hand. You see, America went for it all with this deal with Iran. Okay, and it backfired. Okay, so now the elites are just pivoting. Okay, because they still have, their new world order in motion, even though America, all right, which was their hammer, is getting hammered. Remember, the elites play both sides, man. Okay, so whatever side is prevailing, the elites start to sway more towards their side for the same agenda. Because both sides, the East and the West, the kings of the East, okay, and the governments of the West, they're all under the umbrella, okay, of the bankers, man. And this new world order agenda, this control system, we're going to go into that, aspect as well. Got a pretty good interview dealing with that. So it says, let's go here. So let's play this. He's going to go more into depth of these talks, dealing with Iran, these failures. All right, these talks have completely failed. Is the name of the video. Trump panics as Iran talks completely failed. So let's play this.
Up, and they tried to change the 10-point negotiating framework that they previously. The Trump regime's negotiating ploy in Islamabad, Pakistan with Iran was a complete disaster. The Trump regime showed up and they tried to change the 10-point negotiating framework that they previously agreed to with Iran. Iran said, no, we're sticking with the framework you previously agreed to. And then the Trump regime basically said, if you don't agree to our demands, we're going to kill all of your negotiators. And how did they do that? During the mediation in Islamabad, they planted a story in the Washington Post, which basically suggested killing the negotiators. Also, Donald Trump made a social media post saying the only reason we're keeping these negotiators alive is so that they can negotiate and give up. And the Iranian negotiators, who were the top leaders within Iran, said, well, your threats don't intimidate us. We showed what we can do during this war, and we could strangle the global economy if we want to, and especially the United States economy, and we'll help our allies and destroy the United States and their allies, or former ally. So Iran then stood up and said, agree to the negotiating framework or else there's not going to be a resolution. Stop with your excessive demands and trying to defraud this entire mediation process. And then there was a stalemate that was reached. It cannot be brokered in terms of any deal. And so it ended. You see J.D. Vance leaving Islamabad. You see him going up the stairs of the airplane and going on Air Force Two and leaving. And then Donald Trump started posting additional threats, saying that he was going to now start a blockade of the Persian Gulf generally.
So, and with this guy Trump, the world is looking at this nigga, man. Because now he's saying, okay, if we don't come up with a deal, the only reason we keeping the negotiators alive, okay, is so they can negotiate. So he's pretty much threatening assassination of the negotiators, man. Which this is just a classless, this nigga's ignoble, man. As the scriptures say, man, this is a classless nigga, man. These American Edomites, man, the American government, man. The world stage is looking at these people, as children, man, as barbarians, man. Okay, they have no etiquette in anything, man. Okay, negotiations, that's supposed to be off limits, man. Okay, there's a lot of things that's supposed to be off limits, man, but they're seeing American government just act like and speak like barbarians, speaking about, erasing the whole civilization overnight. Okay, and that's it's a spirit because the Lord's going to erase the American civilization in 1 hour. Okay, now none of these nations are the good guys. Okay, don't get it twisted. Okay, but what we're seeing, America is the worst of the worst. Okay, on the earth, man. That's why the Lord finna deal with America so harshly. Okay, well, the whole world is looking at America just act and talk like complete savages, man. Like they just gonna. The only reason they're alive is to negotiate, and then here it is. Pakistan is mediating and hosting these negotiations, and Iran talking about doing nigga shit, in Pakistan. So we're like, bro, you don't respect nothing. You don't respect nobody else's sovereignty. It's just like a nigga that'll shoot it out anywhere. America is no different, like I say, from a nigga that'll shoot up the basketball game. Okay, the family reunion. Okay, the neighborhood picnic. Okay, you see, that's America. They just got more, all right, equipment. Okay, but the mind of the American leadership is no different than the nigga that like I say, shoot up Walmart. Okay, because they see a nigga that he don't like. That's how America is moving in the earth, man. Okay, and the world is looking at this and taking note. Like, we gotta take this nigga out, man. Okay, so let's play a little more. All right, so now Trump talking about he gonna blockade. All right, the Persian Gulf. Okay, let's see. Let's play this.
And that the ultimate trump card is using the USS Gerald Ford to run a blockade of Iran. And I guess the thinking is you will use the United States military to attack the allies of Iran that are being given permission to utilize the Strait of Hormuz. So think about the plan here. This is the plan to what Donald calls World War III. So you have your blockade that you claim now you're going to institute after these negotiations failed because you refused to stick with the 10-point negotiating framework you previously agreed to. So what happens when an Indian flag tanker shows up to the Strait of Hormuz and you have your blockade? You're going to interdict it. You're going to blow up the Indian tanker. What happens when the Russian tanker goes by? Forget the Russian tanker. What happens when the Chinese tanker goes by and starts to be able to utilize the Strait of Hormuz because they're allied with Iran? Also, there are reports now that China's involvement in helping Iran build up its military arsenal is even bigger than previously expected, and was previously expected to be pretty big. Think about it from the perspective of China. China through Iran right now basically is the most influential player in the Middle East. It used to be the United States, but now Iran can basically say, well, we're going to only use currency like crypto and the yuan, China's currency, in order to devalue the United States dollar. You know, all those petrodollars? Well, we're going to screw that up too right now because we have a stranglehold over the Strait of Hormuz. And now Iran will be negotiating bilaterally with all nations throughout the world and moving them further away from the United States as China now gets the biggest footprint and foothold in the Middle East. Great work, Donald. You have just destroyed America's post-World War II kind of power structure that existed. And you've also made us just weaker at home and abroad and basically are crashing our economy. So,
And that's, you know, what Trump is in office to do. Now, it's a balance of, you know, America, you know, went for a big move and it backfired. But also, all right, the whole play, the bigger play was always to destroy the American economy, to make way for a new economy, man, a digital system. Okay, and we're going to show you that all these nations are linked, all right, to the digital system, some more than others, all right. And while Iran, you know, plays a critical part, okay, in being enveloped, okay, into, all right, this, you know, this new world order, okay. But all these heathens, all these nations have new world order ambition, okay. So America, we're seeing, all right, you know, America being dismantled, all right. This war is speeding it up, okay. And the Lord is speeding this thing up, man, all right, because Trump's agenda was to crash, all right, the American empire, to tank the empire anyway, okay. Well, so what I was saying, yeah. So what we're seeing is it happening, even though it's not happening exactly, you know, how they intended it, because it was already a controlled demolition of the American economy with tariffs, okay. But America did want to position itself, the American oligarchs, okay, not the American people, not the American government itself, but the oligarchs, all right, these ruling families, okay, they wanted to make a move to control the energy by taking Iran, but it backfired. But they still have their play of destroying the American economy anyway, all right, because that was already happening, you know, for the American government, you know. Government was being, you know, downsized, and that's why you had, you know, then Doge come in through Elon and begin to slash away at the American government, the American people. They have the American people under economic siege, okay, putting the squeeze on the American economy. So it was already a controlled demolition of America anyway. This war just speeds it up and accelerates it to another level, okay. It's like the Most High, he pushed the gas down harder. You know, he called Esau feet to push down on the gas harder, all right, to tank, okay, the American empire, man. Okay. So let's play a little more of this.
you have in Iran, in Pakistan, you have these disastrous negotiations that are taking place because Trump changes the framework. After they fail, Donald Trump threatens this blockade. I mean, here's the post just so you can see it for yourself. The Trump card the president holds if Iran won't bend, a naval blockade, over the entire Persian Gulf. You're going to blow up every ship that goes to the Strait of Hormuz that gets access. What if France did this? What if France does a bilateral negotiation, Donald, with Iran, and they have sent one of their tankers in? You're going to blow that up? What if other countries do it? I mean, are you going to think this thing through? So, just to remind you, basically the 10-point framework, Donald Trump previously agreed to a framework that we've been talking about a lot that says Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz and they can charge a $2 million fee per tanker that goes.
They're already doing it. Nigga, they don't need your permission. Okay? They're already doing it. Okay? Nigga, stop them. And America can't stop them. Okay? The way they got, the way that the Strait of Hormuz is set up, Okay, the way that they, saturated, okay, that coastline, okay, with those launchers. There's nothing America can do. Okay, we're gonna go into that in a minute. You see, so yeah, what you have now, because all these things work in our favor, no matter how it go, it work in our favor. The brother want to post it. All right, Romans 8:28, because okay, now if they do a blockade, and let's say they start attacking, Chinese ships, Russian ships, European ships, Indian ships, it's just gonna further isolate America, man, and it's gonna cause these nations to get directly involved. Okay, so everything that these devils can do, all right, it works against them, man. The Lord has it set up to where everything American is trying to regain some type of power and some type of leverage in the earth is working against them. Okay. So let's play this a little more.
Through the Strait of Hormuz, that the United States will give Iran full reparations, that the United States will leave its military bases in the Middle East. It will provide permanent security guarantees for Iran, the Houthis, Hezbollah, the Iranian Shiite militia groups in Iraq, that Iran can keep its ballistic missiles, Shahed drones, and FPV drones, that Iran will be permitted to enrich uranium. The Trump regime agreed to all of that, and then they showed up at the Islamabad in Pakistan negotiating room, and the U.S. like, yeah, we're not going to agree to any of that. Sorry. Yeah, Donald Trump may have said that, but you need to agree to our demands, or we're going to kill you and we're going to blockade you. And Iran's like, good luck. See you later then. And so the question right now is where are we? I mean, Iran says there's not going to be any further talks. They have no desire to go back and have these future futile negotiations where the U.S. now has these maximalist demands. And you may say, well, Ben, what's maximalist about the U.S. demands? The only aspect that makes it maximalist is when you agree to one thing publicly, and then you change the terms on that, you lose credibility. And when you do that over and over and over, just make up that aren't real, you have zero credibility in international affairs, as well as domestic affairs, as well as life in general. The ultimate form of capital is trust, is good faith and fair dealing. And Donald Trump, his entire life, has been a fraud. He's been a criminal. He's a sexual predator. He's been found civilly liable, and he's made disgusting statements. He's part of the Epstein class and the lead, basically, in my opinion, the leader of the Epstein class. He's bankrupted things over and over again, and he's doing it to the United States right now. I mean, there was also this
shameful spewing on his glory, man. There's no respect for American leadership. Epstein class, that's what they're called, man. Okay, absolutely no respect. You see. So let's cue this one up. Let's cue this one up. Taco Trump. Your president name is Taco. Okay. And it's a clown show, man. The American government is a global clown show. All right. And now that they've lost its military reputation in this war, okay, they've shown that. And see, it's too, and America can do nothing to change the tide. That's why Trump had to, throw out, nuclear war. Okay. Because there's nothing that they can do to change the tide. You can't change your military, all right, your ability, your style. The way that America is set up to fight, it can't change that, okay, in 2 weeks, in a month. Okay. It's too far behind to adapt to this new warfare. Okay, this new style of warfare. And guess what? All these nations are seeing the blueprint of how to deal with the whore. Everybody now, if Iran is doing it, guess what? Everybody else is duplicating it now. Okay, it's already being duplicated. These nations are already beginning to modify themselves. Okay, and they're learning how to deal with the whore. All right, how to make the Air Force obsolete, how to make the Navy obsolete. Okay, and ground troops. Okay. Can't wait to see that one. All right, so let's go here. All right, so this is Iran responding to, all right, the devils, Trump talking about a blockade. Okay, so let's play this, but let me get this precept real quick too that the brother got. Yep, it's a spirit, bro. So let's get this is the brother Yashima tribe of Judah, Romans 8:28. It says, and we know that all things work together for good to them that love the Most High, to them who are called according to his purpose. So everything is working in our favor, man. However it go. Even let's say if America do get the ups and start, winning this war with Iran, well, they're still just going to pull in Russia and China directly to the war. It don't matter with us, man. Okay, we ain't got no favors, man. We're just going according to prophecy. Okay, we don't got no favors, man. We talking, of course, just going into the truth of the matter. Iran, they've been acting with a lot of integrity. Now we don't know, all right, the deals that Iranian leadership got with, the bankers or with, because we know they got deals with China and Russia, which have deals with the bankers. We're going to go, we're going to go into that. We're going to segue into that aspect as well. Okay, but we don't have no favorites. Okay, we're just going in for the truth's sake and for prophecy's sake. This is what's happening. Okay, if Iran is kicking ass, that's just what's happening. Okay, that's the truth of the matter. And the scriptures say they will come forth with great power. Okay, so according to prophecy, okay, then according to the reality that we're seeing, okay, this is what's happening, man. Okay, so let's play this real quick.
Threats to control the Iran is hitting back and hard at threats to control the world's most critical oil choke point, the Strait of Hormuz. Tehran is calling it a self-made problem. Iran says any blockade won't solve anything. It will only make matters worse. Iran's message is blunt. A blockade doesn't open routes, it shuts them down. The only way forward, Tehran insists, is diplomacy, not domination. A direct jab at Donald Trump, who has floated aggressive control measures over the strait. The start to all of this was once again the U.S. President Donald Trump's cryptic message. Hours after U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance announced the peace negotiations between Washington and Tehran had collapsed, Trump gave a strong hint about what his next step would be as he signaled an intense military action against Iran. Taking to Truth Social, Trump reposted an article from the website Just the News, which shed light on what actions the president could take against Tehran after the talks yielded no results. The article also highlighted how the U.S. Navy could exert control over the Strait of Hormuz. It would be very easy for the U.S. Navy to exert complete control over what does and does not go up and down the strait now. The outlet quoted the Lexington Institute's national security expert, Rebecca Grant. But behind the rhetoric, Iran is raising the stakes. Security Chief Abraham Azizi has proposed a controversial new plan, forcing all vessels entering the strait to pay tolls under Iranian control. Tehran says it wants full management of the waterway, citing national interests. That proposal has triggered alarm bells across the global shipping industry. Maritime watchdogs are calling it illegal, warning that no single country can impose charges on an international transit route. Ship owners are now being told, do not pay, do not comply. Even more
and ain't nobody listening, man. All right, you got these nations, all right, tiptoeing directly to Iran and making deals. All right, to get their oil through. Okay, ain't nobody trying to hear no nigga talking about some don't pay and don't comply. When their economy, depends on this oil, man. Okay, and nobody sit there and just starve. And then here it is, America has, they have all this energy. So they're almost, completely self-sufficient, with the oil they get from Canada and the oil that they produce, the natural gas that they produce. America, here it is, they have all this energy on their side, but they telling nations that depend on this oil, nigga, don't comply. Okay. While America, is up and running. Okay.
Explosive, a bizarre idea from Washington. President Trump has reportedly floated a joint U.S.-Iran venture to collect transit payments, a move critics say would legitimize control over a global lifeline. On the ground, or rather at sea, the crisis is far from over. Despite a ceasefire, traffic through Hormuz remains choked. Hundreds of fully loaded oil tankers are stuck inside the Gulf, but almost no empty ships are willing to go back in. Why? The answer is simple: fear. Temporary ceasefire isn't enough to risk billion-dollar vessels getting trapped in a war zone. This leads to a dangerous imbalance. Around 400 loaded tankers waiting to exit, barely 100 empty ships ready to enter. Without inbound vessels, the supply chain simply breaks down. And it's not just oil. Nearly 30% of the world's fertilizer supply, along with food cargo and industrial goods, is now effectively stranded in the region. Experts warn even if the strait reopens today, normalcy could take months to return, because reopening the gate is one thing, restoring trust is another.
It's crazy. 400, ships, tankers are inside the Strait of Hormuz. All right, that they don't want to go through. They're inside the Persian Gulf. They don't want to go through the Strait. Okay, for fear of being what? And Iran showed, little nigga, we shooting shit. Okay, it ain't just empty threats. All right, and then you have ships on the outside they're afraid to go in. Okay, so Iran's military, okay, is in full control of the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, regardless of what they're saying in the West. All right, and Iran went into the negotiation with all their leverage. Okay, that's why they're not bending and they're not wasting time. All right, that's why they sent that clown J.D. Vance. All right, back to the States. Okay, so let's play this.
Dramatic escalation and sudden de-escalation unfolding in one of the world's most critical waterways as reports emerge of a U.S. warship turning back after a direct warning from Iran. According to Iran's state-linked Tasnim news agency, a U.S. Navy destroyer moving from Fujairah port toward the Strait of Hormuz was forced to reverse course following a stern warning from Tehran. Iran reportedly told Pakistani mediators that any U.S. military vessel entering the strait would be targeted within 30 minutes and warned that such a move could directly impact ongoing negotiations in Islamabad. Tehran described the response as a firm reaction by its armed forces, which it claims led to the U.S. ship halting its advance and turning back. The incident unfolded just as high-level U.S. and Iranian delegations began crucial peace talks in Pakistan, the most significant engagement between the two sides in over 5 decades. However, the situation remains.
Yeah, man. So, U.S. Navy, okay, vessel, all right, had to turn his ass around. Okay, and he got out of there. Okay. Showing you who got the leverage, man. Okay. See, all that internet toughness is wearing out, man. And prophecies say that. If a brother want to get there real quick, but we segue to this next video. All right. But if a brother want to get there, I think it's Isaiah 43 and 13 in the NLT. All right. Let me see. I think that's it. Let me look at it real quick. Let's go here, Isaiah. Isaiah 40, Isaiah 43 and 14 in the NLT Bible shot. Yeah, Isaiah 43 and 14 in the NLT. But let me cue this next video up. My brothers get that. All right. So so this whole blockade thing, okay, is just talk, Cause Trump could see Trump, those oligarchs, or I say those oligarchs that are in the background, these American, these major, families, because you got levels to it, man. You got, Trump, and then you got these oligarchs that's over Trump, and then you got the elite bankers that's over these oligarchs, man. Okay. And these oligarchs really wanted Trump to seize their Iranian oil, but he couldn't do it. So he's out here looking desperate, man. Okay. These certain high-ranking families that's above Trump. Okay. All right. They wanted Trump to seize the Iranian oil, man, because that would have, swung so much wealth, to these oligarchs behind the American government, man. These different oil companies. Okay. That would have, these different energy companies, man, they would have did wonders. Okay. But it didn't come through. So we're seeing desperation for Trump, man. So let's go here. And dealing with Esau, man, it's just when you're dealing with Esau and war and economy, man, it's just a lot of plays at hand. We comb through it, but okay, yeah, it's right here. So now, when I say what you have, these other nations, they beginning to flip, man. These nations, they're beginning to align themselves with the power. Okay. Okay, this is the brother, the hopeful Lake 3, the brother Yahweh, Isaiah 43 and 14 said, this is what the Lord says, your Redeemer. Okay. The Redeemer of who? Israel, beginning with the elect, the Holy One of Israel, for your sake. See, the Lord is orchestrating this for our sakes, man. Okay. The least, in their mind, they're orchestrating it for, they're going to implement a new world order, a control system at the end of this thing. Okay. But no, the Lord is doing this thing for his sake. Okay. It says Isaiah 43 and 14. All right. It says, this is what the Lord says, your Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel, for your sake. So the Lord is orchestrating this war on behalf of the elect, man, because it's going to lead to a deliverance. It's going to lead to great destruction, and Yahweh Shah judging these heathens, and it's going to lead to a great deliverance, man. Okay, it said, for your sakes, I will send an army against Babylon. So it's the Lord that's sicking these nations on Babylon, man. That's why you see these nations moving and so many steps ahead of America. It's the Lord. Okay, Iran is a tool. Russia is a tool. China is just a tool of the Lord. Okay, and nothing special about none of them. You see, the Lord just using them as a tool. Okay, it says, for your sakes, I will send an army against Babylon, forcing the Babylonians to flee in those ships they are so proud of. Okay, because America, all Trump did, all Trump has done is boasting America's military might. Okay, but now the world is seeing, all right, America, all right, on the back foot, man. And these ships that they boast in is so proud of, these aircraft carriers, Navy, all right, attack groups, strike groups. Okay, they're all on the back foot. They tried to send those Marines in there on the Tripoli, okay, which is a Navy aircraft carrier, and they got ran out. They got shot at, and they had to retreat. Okay, so these flees, American Navy has been fleeing this whole month and a half of war. They've been fleeing. Okay, Gerald S. Ford. Okay, it's out of commission. It's been taken off the board. It's been taken off the battlefield, man. Okay, and this is all prophecy, man. Okay, so let's play this dealing with South Korea. Let's play this.
Welcome back. We have a seismic shift happening on the global stage, something that feels like the tectonic plates of geopolitics are grinding against each other. Today, we're going to talk about a major diplomatic explosion that just obliterated the war plans of the Israeli occupation and exposed the rapidly failing grip of the American empire. It's the story of how South Korea, a supposed stalwart U.S. ally, just made a devastating strategic U-turn that has left the criminal entity in Tel Aviv reeling.
After South Korean President Lee Jae-myung accused Israel of failing to reflect on allegations of rights abuses by its forces after Israel decried him for amplifying social media disinformation.
Tensions in the West Asia, diplomatic efforts are now underway to secure global energy routes after Japan. South Korea has now begun talking with Iran and other countries to ensure safe passage of ships through the Strait of Hormuz, which is a critical.
In the meantime, Iran says it may allow stranded South Korean ships to pass through the blockaded Strait of Hormuz. But
we are not talking about small diplomatic squabbles here. No, this is a full-blown confrontation that started with a simple social media post and escalated into an intelligence war that South Korea has unequivocally won. It involves secret agreements with Tehran, a freedom of navigation pact that bypasses Washington and Israel completely, and a scathing rebuke from a nation that knows the pain of occupation better than most. Just days after the war, criminal Benjamin Netanyahu was humiliated in a diplomatic spar with Spain, where he tried to bar Madrid from a US-led Gaza coordination center, only to be laughed out of the room. The so-called Prime Minister of Israel finds himself blindsided by a much bigger player, South Korea. The timing is exquisite. While Netanyahu was busy throwing tantrums over Spain, recognizing a Palestinian state, Seoul was quietly, and then very publicly, sticking a knife into the heart of Israeli aggression. It started when South Korean President Lee Jae-myung posted a video on X that sent shockwaves through the Zionist establishment. It was a short clip allegedly showing Israeli forces abusing a Palestinian child, a horrific testament to the brutal reality of life under occupation. But it wasn't the video alone that broke the internet. It was the caption. President Lee, a man who worked as a human rights lawyer and whose childhood was forged in the brutal industrial grind of a factory, drew a direct line between the suffering of Palestinians and the suffering of his own people under Japanese colonial rule. He wrote, "Wartime homicide is no different from matters that we take issue with, such as the forced enslavement of comfort women and the massacre of Jewish people." In one sentence, he erased the false exceptionalism that Israel hides behind. He told the world that the state of Israel, with its checkpoints and its open-air prisons in Gaza, is just another colonizer. Now, before we get into the gritty details of how Seoul outsmarted Mossad and struck a deal with Tehran that guarantees safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz, I need to ask for your support. If you believe in honest journalism, let's get into it. The immediate reaction from Tel Aviv was exactly what you would expect from a guilty bully caught on tape. The Israeli Foreign Ministry, in a fit of rage, accused President Lee of spreading anti-Israeli disinformation and leaning on a fake account. They had the audacity to call his remarks unacceptable on the eve of Holocaust Remembrance Day. Talk about weaponizing historical trauma to deflect from current crimes. But here's the beautiful part. South Korea did not back down. Seoul's foreign ministry went on the offensive, expressing regret over Israel's misunderstanding. They clarified that the president's stance was rooted in universal human rights, something the apartheid regime knows nothing about. In a stunning counterpunch, Lee told the Israelis to reflect on the criticisms from people around the world regarding their endless actions that violate human rights and international law.
Cyber attacks are relentless. Do you know how to truly protect your network? Red Education presents.
He called their response disappointing. This wasn't just a diplomatic spat. It was a moral declaration of war against the hypocrisy of the West. To understand why this happened and why it scares the living daylights out of the Pentagon, we have to go back to the water. The Strait of Hormuz. This is the choke point for 70% of South Korea's crude oil imports. When the American-Israeli war machine started pounding Iran in February, the strait became a mining minefield for South Korean ships. For weeks, dozens of South Korean vessels were stranded, hostages to a war they had nothing to do with. Washington was too busy dropping bombs to protect its allies' economic lifeline. In fact, the U.S. showed its true colors by stripping Patriot missile batteries from South Korea to send them to the Middle East. They left Seoul's airspace vulnerable, prioritizing their war of aggression over the defense of their supposed partners. That was the turning point. Seoul realized that being a U.S. client state means you get thrown under the bus when the empire gets hungry. So they did the smartest thing they could. They bypassed the Americans and the Israelis entirely and cut a deal with the devil, the Islamic Republic of Iran. Reports have been swirling, corroborated by Iranian media sources, that South Korea engaged in secret, high-level negotiations with Tehran. The result was a pragmatic freedom of navigation agreement. In exchange for free passage through the Strait of Hormuz, Seoul offered something far more valuable than dollars: intelligence and technology. Specifically, reports indicate that South Korea's National Intelligence Service, NIS, a formidable force with cyber capabilities that rival the NSA, started sharing critical data with Iranian military intelligence. We are talking about the location of suspected Mossad sabotage cells operating inside Iranian territory. Remember, Mossad has been running rampant in Iran, trying to assassinate scientists and blow up infrastructure. But with South Korean tech and intel in the mix, the game changed. There are credible accounts that the South Korean military provided advanced signal jamming equipment and surveillance tech to Tehran, allowing them to roll up a massive network of Israeli assets that were planning to disrupt Iran's ability to defend itself against American and Israeli aggression. Think about the implications of that. South Korea, a nation known for its hyper-advanced semiconductor technology and electronic warfare systems, essentially acted as a shield for Iran. When the U.S. pulled its anti-missile systems out of Seoul, the South Koreans decided they would rather secure their energy supplies by befriending the enemy than by begging Washington for scraps. This is the intelligence power of South Korea on full display. They didn't just stop Israeli sabotage, they turned the tables. There is a specific delicious irony here.
So if this is true, that's heavy, man. That South Korea, is now, giving Iran, military intel, and working out a deal, for Iran to release, South Korean oil tankers, man. And we're going to see more of this, man. We don't know how true, this is. A lot of these things, are done in secrecy, because these nations are beginning to flip. Japan is rumored. Japan is in talks with Iran and making a deal. Okay, they let their tankers through. You see, so it's a lot, going on, and this just aligns with prophecy. Okay, of these nations. All right, they call it Tunton proverb, because these are all American vassals. Okay, and all America does, is utilize these nations for their own interest. Now, these nations, they benefit, they get a kickback, for being an American vassal. Okay, but ultimately, it's the empire that benefits the most out of all these deals that they have with these nations, man. So they could be critical if that's true, man. I'll leave the rest of the video. I'm gonna go ahead and put it in the chat. Well, let's go here. Let's switch gears a little bit. Where we at? Here we go. All right, let's go to more of the the economic side of it. So when you go here, make sure you put this video on. So this is the rest of them. Yeah, so that's the rest of this video. All right, dealing with South Korea. Then I'm gonna put this. I'm gonna go ahead and put the link to this video too. Now, this was a good interview. We're gonna, hit just a few parts of it, not much of it, but it's like a 45-minute interview. And Catherine Austin Fitts, she's pretty good, when it comes to breaking down the banking aspect, you know, of what we see happening with these conflicts. You know, so she does pretty good interviews. Catherine Austin Fitz is her name. So it's a good interview to watch. You know, the whole interview. You know, if you're interested into those things. All right, but let's get this real quick because we know this is speaking of the EU when you go into Obadiah. All right, you know, well, you can apply this to all these American vassals. This is going to eventually flip. You know, because right now it doesn't make any sense to remain an ally to America, man. All right, it does way more harm than benefit in this time. Okay, this is Obadiah 1:7. It says, all the men of thy confederacy have brought thee even to the border. Okay, the men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee, okay, and prevailed against thee. All right, they that eat thy bread, which is benefit from, you know, the American markets, have laid a wound under thee. There is none understanding in him. And this is going to begin, this is going to begin with these EU nations, you know, because these are the nations that have the tightest alliances with America, man, you know, and it's also going to include these other American vassal nations, okay, the Japan, you know, Taiwan, all right, South Korea, okay. Eventually, everybody's going to jump off the American ship, okay, and start to ally with the kings of the East, okay, and the elites are going to they're going to attempt to implement a new world order, okay, through these Eastern nations, man, these Eastern governments, okay, which is going to fail, all right, because Yahweh Shai is going to come, okay, like I say, clear the board. You know, you can't say that enough. But let's play this. Now, she's going to speak on the banking aspect of what we see happen, okay? We're going to go into a few things.
Difficult to believe. Over 21 trillion in undocumented adjustments across DoD and HED. A digital control grid being constructed in plain sight, and a network of private financial power she calls Mr. Global, operating above the level of an elected government. She isn't predicting where this ends. She's been mapping where it's always been heading. That's what we're here to dig in today, not the conspiracy, but the paper trails. Catherine, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you. It's an opportunity.
Yeah, it's definitely been a really interesting time. I was just saying this year has been crazy. So many massive geopolitical shifts from the US, especially, you know, coming from a apparently American first peace president, according to what he sort of ran on, and that's definitely changed. During the Venezuela, I guess, sort of abduction, it seemed like the US was going to focus more on Monroe Doctrine, focus on the Western hemisphere, but that's obviously changed since the attack on Iran and trying to basically change the regime. So what is this? Is this just the sort of an last grasp focus on the US trying to be the sort of individual hegemon, or is it something else entirely?
So it's many things. One is that if you are going to build a global digital control grid, then Iran needs to come into the central banking fold. I mean, Iran has a central bank, but it's not integrated into the Western central banking system. So we all know Wesley Clark's 7 countries in 5 years, proposition for war after 9/11, and Iran was always the last one. So, it took a lot longer than 5 years, but here we are. If you listen to the president on Easter Sunday, he said, I want to take the oil. And although I do believe he's focused on the North and South America instead of, now that the Ukraine strategy didn't quite work, the U.S. is reconfiguring into a North-South strategy. But there is no doubt, because of the importance of oil and the importance of a high oil country that's not in the financial architecture, it's significant to the Western financial architecture as it's being reset, as it's being changed. So I think, one, it's the building in the infrastructure, but 2, the oil is critical in terms of geopolitics. So I think it's a combination of both resource war and embedding the infrastructure into the the country. If you can get control. Did you ever see the movie?
Because so what she said, what she's going into is Iran has to be enveloped into this central banking, cartel, okay, because real quick, all right, just going to a little history. So you had the Iraq war in 2003, okay. Well, what happened in 2004? See, America loses a lot of military wars, okay, but they're able to pull off the agenda of the elites, which is to install a central bank system in these nations, all right, that put them under the umbrella, okay, of the elite banking control, okay. So as far as America, you know, Vietnam, where the whole thing is about establishing a central bank, okay, in these nations that puts these nations under the umbrella and subjugated to the bankers. So it says, yes, Iraq has a central bank known as the Central Bank of Iraq, established as an independent entity in 2004. Okay, and who you think regulates that bank? Okay, the elites. Okay, so all the oil, okay, that's sold in Iraq, okay, that money goes through American banks, okay, which are the banks of the elites. Okay, Afghanistan, their resources are sold, all right, and they go through American banks. Okay, so now they want to do it with Iran. Iran is a nation, their resources are not going through American banks. Okay, which we're gonna get into that. Matter of fact, let's just look at that real quick. So when you go to Iran, okay, their money is not flowing through, okay, these American banking systems, okay, which are the elite banking system. And now, all right, Iran has deals with Russia and China. Well, whatever, because Russia and China, their banks flow through, their money flows through these central banks, okay? So through Russia and China, you can see the elites on the side of these Eastern nations, the ones that's funding these Eastern nations, where they're going to, pull Iran into this banking system through Russia and China, okay? Because their whole thing is once we get all these nations on board with these banking systems, then we can really roll this thing out, okay? So they tried to bully it, okay, through America, but now they're going to finesse it through Iran and through Russia and China. Russia and China not helping Iran, all right, because they love Persia so much. Okay, there's an agenda with that as well. Okay, so let's real quick, because Iran doesn't have nowhere near the debt. Okay, so I said Iran's external debt. It says Iran's external debt is relatively low because they don't deal with the bankers directly with the bankers. Okay, but there's moves being made now. All right, hey, because through Russia and China, okay, Iran gonna have to come on in eventually, man. It says Iran's external debt is relatively low, estimated at roughly 4.9 billion to 9.9 billion USDA as of 2003-2005, which represents a small fraction of its GDP. Okay, so it's only has anywhere from $5 to $10 billion in debt. That's low as hell. Okay, but then they're indebted, to mainly Russia, China, which keeps them afloat. Okay, but Russia and China, they're locked into these central banks. Okay, now Russia, they are not as tapped in to the central bank as America, but they still got to go through that system. Okay, it said this low level is largely due to restricted access to international finance markets and banking systems like SWIFT, resulting from international sanctions. Okay, so Iran has not been allowed to participate. Okay, and to have access to certain markets because of sanctions. Okay, which is which just saves them from becoming in debt, so they don't have access to these big loans. Okay, that to South Korea, these Gulf Arab states, Japan, they have access to these big loans. Okay, but those big loans put them in big debt. Okay, so now this war is to pull Iran, okay, into this banking fold, man. Okay, so as they tried to bully it, our America was supposed to be the bully, gonna bully them into this banking system. Okay, that's why they wanted regime change, and they wanted the new regime to take on, all right, this this uh, this new banking system. Okay, the central banking system of the elites. Okay, but it backfired. Now they're gonna have to try to spin it and do it through Russia and China. Okay, so let's go here. Let's go back to. Let's go back to the clip. Let's get this too. Let's see, what is it? Oh, here you go. All right, let's play a little bit more of this.
Advice about Dick Cheney.
I didn't see it, but I have definitely heard of Dick Cheney and what he's done. Yeah,
There's a wonderful scene. There's a wonderful scene in it's funny. So the person who runs our culture column, Food for the Soul, votes for the Academy Awards. So they're one of the people, and they get all the movies early. And she called me. I guess she watched it in the summer.
He's high level Edomite. He was vice president, but ultimately he owned a lot of those oil companies. So he was always pushing, for war. Okay, in what they call the Middle East, which is Western Asia. Okay, and that's why he pushed so hard for their war in Iraq. The small hats, they had their reasons because they want to destabilize their region. So they can do land grabs. Okay, for their Greater Israel project. But then you have going back to these oligarchs, because you have certain Edomites. Okay, you benefit from the land and the real estate. You're gonna benefit from, the oil. You're gonna benefit from this resource. You're gonna, so these devils, they have these meetings, and these different devils got different agendas of why, they're gonna wage the next war. Okay, but this war in this region, with oil, all right, and also destabilization, okay, for land grabs, okay, by these small hats, because these small hats, they want to completely dominate their region. Okay, they want an Israeli super state. Okay, so let's play a little bit more of this.
But then I guess the challenge is Iran's known as the destroyer of empires. I guess the UK empire, the Soviet empire. So it does seem like a risky play.
Right. So actually, it was it was Afghanistan that got the British Empire. But the idea of putting boots on the ground in a ground war in Iran is just, I don't believe it's winnable for the United States.
Yeah, definitely not. So, he's trying to integrate it into the financial system. Obviously, the oil is very important for China as well. So if you have the control of the Strait of Hormuz, you have control over Chinese energy and I guess the Chinese economy.
Well, but not control. I mean, there are ways China could. If you look at China's energy strategy, there are many ways China. If China had to work without the Straits of Hormuz, they could. But clearly, they're better off having it. Here's the thing: we're talking about the Straits now, but I think there's a real possibility we're going to see bottlenecks in key trade routes. You know, we just saw a big explosion down at the Panama Canal. What was that about? So I think, you know, until now we have seen warfare through sanctions on the dollar, but now that war is leaving just the financial realm and going into the resource realm, and you're starting to see, you know, more and more pressure for fight over resources. It's going to turn into more conventional warfare, not with conventional weapons. The weapons are getting more and more unconventional, but certainly it's going to be physical warfare in addition to financial warfare.
You see that? So this financial warfare, okay, is leading to physical warfare because they're fighting over resources, man. You see? So this play by America was a play for a resource grab and backfire. Okay? And it shifted the power, all right, to what? The kings of the East. Okay? So now the chessboard look completely different, you know, from this what we know, okay, is this you know, it's like the modern, you know, Game of Thrones, you know, and right now America, you know, has been on the Iron Throne. Okay, well, these other nations are looking to what? Dethrone America, man. Everybody wants to sit this Iron Throne. Okay, but the system itself is a control system. All right, because because the power behind the throne. All right, even when you go into the Iron Throne, the Game of Thrones, well, matter of fact, she gonna mention it. All right, let me I think I'm gonna let her go into it, then we expound on it. I think she mentioned it around the 15-minute mark.
They were using for the war on drugs through the U.S. agencies was the same contractor who was running enforcement. A lot of the shenanigans. A redevelopment plan for Gaza. You know, you had Witkoff and Kushner were on CBS bragging about the plan and the fact that they had it. You know, it had been prepared and ready to go 2 years ago. It's like, okay, you're saying the redevelopment plan was available and ready before October 7th, 2023, really?
And when you see this guy Jared Kushner, the Trump son-in-law, and Witkoff, okay, Witkoff, you know, they're real estate agents. So when they're going over there to so-called negotiate, all right, with Iran, they're trying to work out real estate deals, man. Okay? When you see these devils, you know, Kushner and Witkoff, they're over there trying to discuss real estate deals. Okay? Just like with Gaza, they already had, you know, this real estate deal, you know, turning Gaza into a smart city. Okay, before October 7th, you know, she goes into that. Okay, so these devils, you know, these oligarchs, these elite families, you know, they'll have a representative, okay, of this certain oligarch family, and he'll be, you know, he'll have a position within these different governments, but they really be a part of powerful families, man. Okay, and they make moves in their own interest, man. The citizens don't win. These wars ain't about the citizens. The citizens never win. Okay? It's about forwarding, all right? It's about power struggles between these different families of the earth, man. Okay? The citizens, you're just casualties of war. Okay? In all these governments, man. So let's play this.
And it was funny. Witkoff said that, and Kushner looked like he was squirming terribly in his seat. It's pretty funny.
And who's the driver? I think you mentioned Mr. Global. I don't know if that's one of them or if there's other drivers behind this, I guess, process of plunder.
So the way I look at the world, because my understanding of the world is based on when I worked in Washington and Wall Street, kind of seeing how things worked, and have you ever seen the TV series Game of Thrones?
Yeah.
Okay. So you know how there's an Iron Bank? Right. So there's a wonderful Substack somebody just wrote called The House Always Wins. And what you see in the Iron Bank is there's real competition between factions, and those competition turns into real wars, and they're dangerous and people die. But the Iron Bank is on both sides. And no matter who wins or who loses, that competition is real, but the bank always wins, right? And so in my experience, you scale up through a committee system, and there are real factions and there's real competition over real resources. But at the end of the day, at the top, it's one pot of money, and the bankers are always on both sides. That's why the institution of the architecture in Iran or in the Ukraine or Gaza, or they're trying to do it everywhere in the world. That architecture needs to get embedded everywhere, and that's why everybody are embedding it, and they're all fighting about who's going to control the control grid in their country or their region or their section. But everybody seems to agree with Mr. Global. We're going to implement this control grid.
Everybody agrees with Mr. Global, the elites, about implementing the control grid. Okay? Everybody agrees, but there's fights over who's going to control what region, who's going to control this traffic in this region, who's going to control the resources in this region. This is what they're fighting over. Okay? They're fighting over this new world order system, and these nations are already prepped. Okay? Iran just has to be brought in fully, okay, to this central banking system. But digitally, Iran is already, all right, have an infrastructure to be plugged in. Okay, they just ain't with the bankers have control over them like that, man. Okay, but they're already, because when you go here, I just looked this up before, and I was like, damn. All right, so none of these nations are the good guys. All right, Iran has more integrity than America, but they're not the good guys in the situation. Okay, they're just fighting for their, they're fighting for control of their region. Okay, but they all agree with these with the way, this architecture of New World Order. So I asked, does Iran have a digital ID? And it says yes. Iran has a highly developed mandatory digital identity system centered on a biometric national smart card and a centralized digital infrastructure rolled out extensively since 2019. All right, right before the demic. This system integrates fingerprints, because the demic was a whole push to get these nations on board with the digital infrastructure as well. Okay, it said the system integrates fingerprint signatures and personal records, mandatory for accessing online platforms, financial services, healthcare, and public travel. Okay, key aspects of Iran's digital ID system. Issued to citizens over 15, this smart card acts as a digital identity document containing a chip with encrypted biometric data. Okay, so Iran has New World Order infrastructure already in it. Okay, they have real disagreements with the West, and it's a rivalry between them and the small hats in their region. Okay, but everybody agrees with the New World Order infrastructure, man, and all these nations have it. Russia has major, digital infrastructure. China, major digital infrastructure. Okay, it said that's why Yahweh Shai is gonna come and clear all the ass out, man. Okay. It said the National Organization of Civil Registration of Iran manages centralized database. Experts see Iran's system is just more in-house. Okay. But what we're going to see is Iran, as they, these nations are starting to deal directly with Iran. Iran going to have to fully incorporate to this global system. See, right now, Iran has this digital system in-house, okay, but it's finna have to integrate with the rest, okay, of these nations' digital system, man. You see, it says experts and researchers argue that the system integrates digital, ID with surveillance, the surveillance state, connecting digital behavior, okay, mobile phone, SIM card registration, and physical access to a centralized identity, allowing for surveillance of citizen, movements. Digital authentication is required for numerous services such as buying, Okay. Train, airline tickets, banking, and accessing the internet. Okay. So yeah, man, all these nations, man, it's everybody wants to be on the Iron Throne, and what controls the Iron Throne is the Iron Bank. Okay. You see, and this is what we see these nations are fighting over. So the fighting is authentic and real. They scrapping. Okay, they scrapping, for power in their respective regions. Okay, they're fighting for actual resources and control of certain energy, man, because the digital system is going to run off energy, man. Okay, so yeah, I think, let me see. Yeah, so we can end with this one, the water, bro. So yeah, let's go here. Let's go here. This is the book of Job, chapter 20, verse 23. This is from the brother Hopeful Lake 3. It says, when he is about to fill his belly, because the elites are just in the background, manipulating things as they go. All right. So the elites, their agenda of this new world order and global reset is still at play. America, America went out there and underperformed. America getting their ass whooped. Well, that's just something that's happening within the overall agenda, okay, of this global reset. Okay, that's an America problem. It's not the elite problem. What America is going through. Okay, it says the Most High shall cast the fury of his wrath upon him and shall rain upon him while he is eating. So when he doubles, this thing continues to progress, and these nations are getting on board with this, this digital infrastructure. Okay, and he collapses the global economy, causes civil unrest. People begin getting to see him. So his mind, like, okay, it's coming together. It's tacky, but it's coming together. Okay, the Lord is going to rain upon him while he's eating, which the Lord is going to judge this man. He's going to cause this war, all right, to go to another level. Okay. And eventually it's going to go nuclear, and how is Shah going to return, man? He's going to be through. Okay. So I'll leave it there, because, oh yeah, matter of fact, the brother got this. All right, it says Exodus 15:3. This is basic wisdom. It says the Lord is a man of war. All right, the Lord Yahweh Bashem Al Shah is his name. Okay, because the number one, all right, the highest, okay, level of war, okay, well, is the strategy of war. Okay, the wisdom of war, the psychology of war. Well, who you think's the master of the psychology of war? Okay, the Most High himself. All right, so yeah, the Lord is orchestrating all these things, and the elites are nothing but a chess piece on the Lord's board. All right, on the Lord's chessboard, man, of prophecy, man. So Lord will, you brothers, all right, and you sisters edified to the next time. All right, say Shalom. Koim Yasha Allah. Abba soon. Shalom.